The Land Cruiser's engine coughed like a dying man as Professor Elias Ward guided it through the Sudanese desert, following coordinates that had cost him 3 months' salary to obtain. The year was 2003, and despite the world's technological advances, this stretch of Sudan remained as untouched by modernity as it had been during the time of the pharaohs. The GPS unit on his dashboard flickered intermittently, its satellite connection struggling against the vast emptiness that stretched to every horizon. At 55, Elias had dedicated his life to biblical archaeology, chasing fragments of truth buried beneath millennia of sand and superstition. His colleagues at Oxford regarded him with the patronizing tolerance reserved for brilliant minds that had wandered too far into obsession. They whispered that his divorce, his estrangement from his daughter, even his recent sabbatical, all stemmed from his relentless pursuit of proof that the Old Testament's most controversial passages held literal historical truth.
The ruins appeared like a mirage at first, wavering in the heat that rose from the desert floor. But as Elias drew closer, the ancient stones solidified into undeniable reality. Weathered sandstone blocks jutted from the sand at impossible angles, their surfaces carved with hieroglyphs that seemed to shift when viewed directly. This was it, the site his contact in Khartoum had described, where local Nubians refused to venture after sunset, crossing themselves and muttering about the Curse of Canaan. Elias parked beside what might have once been a temple wall and began unloading his equipment. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind across stone. No birds flew overhead. No insects buzzed in the gathering dusk. Even the omnipresent desert flies that had plagued him for the past week seemed to avoid this place. As he erected his tent, Elias noticed the first tablet fragment, a piece of black stone no larger than his palm, partially buried near what appeared to be an altar. The inscription was unlike anything he'd encountered in 30 years of study. The characters seemed to be a fusion of ancient Hebrew and Cushite script, the letters intertwining like lovers or serpents. Working by lamplight, Elias carefully excavated the fragment and began his translation. The text was fragmentary, but certain phrases emerged with disturbing clarity. And Ham looked upon his father's nakedness, and the shadow was born of his seeing. The sons of the accursed shall guard the threshold until the stars fall. Cush of the burning flesh, Mitzrayim of the tomb, crown, Put of the forgetting wind, and Canaan the weeping child. Elias felt a chill despite the desert's lingering heat. This wasn't merely another version of the familiar biblical narrative. This text suggested something far older and more complex, a curse that extended beyond Ham's biblical transgression into realms of cosmic horror. As midnight approached, Elias made his first crucial mistake. In his excitement over the discovery, he ignored the strange symbols carved around the tablet's edges, symbols that, had he looked more carefully, clearly represented warnings. Instead, he photographed the fragment from every angle, made detailed rubbings, and began attempting a more complete translation. The moment his pen completed the first full phrase in English, the shadow-born children of the first transgression, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The cold came from within the stones themselves, seeping upward like groundwater made of ice. Elias's breath misted as he looked up from his notebook to see that the ruins around him had changed. Where before there had been scattered blocks and partial walls, now loomed the suggestion of a complete structure, a temple or palace that seemed to exist in the periphery of vision, snapping back to ruins whenever he looked directly at it. And then he saw the first guardian. Cush emerged from the deepest shadow cast by the altar, his form towering 9 feet tall with skin that seemed to burn without flame. Each footstep left molten prints in the sand, and the air around him shimmered with unbearable heat. His eyes were the color of bronze in the forge, and when he spoke, his voice carried the crackle of wood consumed by fire. "Scholar," Cush intoned, the single word causing the nearby stones to glow cherry red. "You have awakened what was meant to slumber." Elias scrambled backward, his academic mind struggling to process the impossible. You're an hallucination. Heat stroke. Dehydration." Cush's laugh was the sound of a blacksmith's hammer on metal. "I am the burning memory of the first son, guardian of the threshold between your world and the realm of the damned, and you, transgressor, have broken the first seal." Before Elias could respond, the second guardian manifested. Mitzrayim rose from what had appeared to be empty sand, his form that of a desiccated pharaoh crowned with living serpents. His skin was parchment dry, his face a skull barely clothed in flesh. and the snakes that writhed around his brow whispered in ancient Egyptian, their voices like rustling papyrus. "The scholar seeks knowledge," Mitzrayim hissed, and his words carried the dust of open tombs. "But knowledge without wisdom is the path to damnation." The third guardian materialized as a disturbance in the wind itself. Put appeared as a shadow given semi-substance, a figure of shifting darkness that seemed to erase whatever it passed over. Where Cush brought heat, and Mitzrayim brought the chill of the grave, Put brought absence, the negation of being itself. Memory fades, Put whispered, its voice the sound of sand pouring through an hourglass. Identity dissolves. What are you, scholar, when you cannot remember your name? And indeed, for a terrifying moment, Elias found his own identity slipping away like water through cupped hands. He was a man in the desert? A teacher? The details fled from him until only terror remained. "No," he gasped, clutching his notebook like an anchor. "I am Professor Elias Ward. I am a biblical archaeologist from Oxford University." His declaration seemed to stabilize him, and Put's form wavered with what might have been disappointment. "The fourth guardian comes," Mitzrayim intoned, and the serpents on his crown began to writhe more frantically. From the direction of what Elias now realized was a sacrificial altar came a sound that stopped his heart, the crying of a child. But this was no ordinary weeping. This was the sound of innocence in agony, of suffering given voice, and it carried with it the buzz of 1,000,000 locusts and the copper smell of fresh blood. Canaan appeared as a boy of perhaps 8 years, his form twisted and malformed, his skin bearing marks that suggested both disease and divine punishment. His tears fell upward instead of down, becoming black birds that circled overhead, cawing prophecies of doom. Where his tears had fallen over the centuries, the sand had turned red as rust. "Uncle," the child thing said to Elias, its voice carrying impossible knowledge. "You have come to learn the truth of the curse, but truth comes with obligations. Are you prepared to accept them?" The 4 guardians formed a circle around Elias, and the ruins began their first major transformation. The scattered stones flowed like water, rising and reforming into a complete temple complex that belonged to no single culture. Nubian columns supported Egyptian lintels, Libyan carvings adorned Canaanite altars, and at the center of it all stood a throne of black stone that seemed to absorb light itself. "Sit," commanded Canaan, his child's voice carrying an authority that made the other guardians bow their heads, "and learn the rules by which you must now live." Elias found himself compelled to approach the throne. The moment he sat upon it, knowledge flooded his mind, not the gradual understanding that came from study, but the overwhelming rush of direct revelation. He saw the true nature of Ham's transgression, not merely looking upon his father's nakedness, but witnessing Noah in communion with something that should never have been seen. He saw the birth of the shadow-born, the children of that forbidden sight, and their eternal task as guardians of the boundary between worlds. "The rules are simple," Canaan said, his form flickering between that of a suffering child and something far more ancient and terrible. "Follow them perfectly, and you may leave this place with your sanity intact. Fail in even the smallest particular, and you will join us as the 5th guardian, watching over this threshold until the end of days." Cush stepped forward, his burning form casting no shadow. "First rule, you may not speak our names aloud while the sun touches the horizon. To do so is to give us power over your world." Mitzrayim's serpent crown writhed as he intoned the second rule. "You may not record our words in any language of the living. Only the dead tongues may carry our voice safely." Put's shadowy form seemed to consume light as it spoke. "You may not remember our appearance when you close your eyes. Each memory must be forgotten before sleep, lest we follow you into dreams." And finally Canaan, his upward falling tears becoming a cloud of darkness above them. "You may not leave this place until you have learned the complete truth of the curse, but once you know it fully, you may not remain, for the knowledge will kill you if held too long in mortal flesh." Elias felt his rational mind rebelling against these arbitrary restrictions. These rules, they're contradictory. How can I learn the truth if I can't record it or remember it? The child guardian smiled, revealing teeth like broken pottery. "That is the paradox that has trapped every scholar who came before you. 7 others have sat upon this throne, Professor Ward. Their bones lie beneath these shifting sands, and their spirits serve as our lesser guardians." To emphasize the point, pale figures began emerging from the sand around the temple, men and women in the clothing of different eras, all bearing the wide-eyed stare of those who had seen too much. Elias recognized the style of a Victorian explorer, a medieval monk, what appeared to be a Roman historian, and others whose origins were lost to time. "Follow the rules perfectly," Canaan repeated, "and you may yet escape their fate." Dawn broke over the impossible temple, and with the sun's first rays, the four guardians faded like smoke. But the structure remained, a maze of corridors and chambers that seemed to rearrange themselves when Elias wasn't looking directly at them. The throne at the center had become a library of sorts, with stone tablets arranged in neat rows, each one inscribed with fragments of the greater truth. Remembering the rules, Elias was careful not to speak the guardians' names as the sun climbed toward the horizon. He began his study in earnest, translating tablet after tablet, each one revealing more of the cosmic horror that lay behind the familiar biblical narrative.
The true story was far more terrible than anything recorded in Scripture. Noah's nakedness had been a metaphor. What Ham had witnessed was his father's communion with entities from outside creation itself, beings that existed in the spaces between stars and fed on the dreams of the living. These entities had offered Noah knowledge of future floods, not just of water, but of darkness and madness that would periodically sweep across the earth.
Ham's sin had been not just seeing, but understanding, and in that understanding, he had become pregnant with shadows, giving birth to children who were only partially human. Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan, not merely the progenitors of earthly nations, but wardens assigned to guard the boundaries between the human world and the realm of the hungry dark. As Elias worked, translating the ancient text into Latin to comply with the second rule, he became aware that he was being watched. The lesser guardians, the failed scholars, stood at the edges of his vision, their ghostly forms serving as a constant reminder of the price of failure. One of them, the Victorian explorer, approached close enough that Elias could read the nameplate on his expedition jacket, Sir Reginald Blackwood, 1887. The rules seemed simple enough, Blackwood's spirit whispered, his voice like wind through dry bones. But they are designed to be broken. Each one contains a trap that becomes visible only after you've fallen into it. "What do you mean?" Elias whispered back, careful to keep his voice low lest the guardians somehow hear. "The first rule, not speaking their names while the sun touches the horizon. But what is touching, Professor? When the sun is partially visible? When any part of it remains above the ground? The rule's imprecision is intentional. I spoke Cush's name at what I believed was full darkness, but a single star gleam reflected from a distant dune was enough to constitute sun touch in their judgment." Elias felt his blood chill. "And the others?" "The second rule forbids recording their words in languages of the living. But Latin died long ago, did it not? Yet here you are, writing in it, and Latin serves Mass in churches across the world. Is it truly dead, or merely dormant?" The implications struck Elias like a physical blow. Every rule contained within it the seeds of its own violation. They were designed not to guide him to safety, but to trap him in increasingly subtle ways. "Why are you telling me this?" Elias asked. Blackwood's spectral form was already fading as the sun reached its zenith. "Because we few who remain partly ourselves hope that someone, someday, might succeed where we failed. The truth must be learned, Professor Ward, the complete truth, for if it remains buried here, the guardians grow stronger with each passing century. Soon they will not need a transgressor to wake them. They will simply emerge." As the ghost vanished entirely, Elias realized he had learned only a fraction of what the tablets contained, and night was coming, bringing with it the return of the four guardians and another test of his ability to follow their impossible rules. The second night brought revelations that strained Elias's sanity to its breaking point. As darkness fell and the guardians manifested once more, the temple complex underwent another transformation. The walls became transparent, revealing vistas of cosmic horror, cities of black stone floating in starless voids, oceans of liquid shadow where things with too many eyes swam in formations that hurt to perceive, and at the center of it all, a presence so vast and malevolent that Elias's mind simply refused to process it directly. "You begin to understand," Canaan said, his child's form now clearly visible as a thin disguise worn over something ancient and hungry. "The curse was never about the color of skin or the subjugation of peoples. It was about inheritance, the terrible inheritance of knowledge that should never have entered your world." Mitzrayim gestured toward the transparent walls. Noah learned of the coming darkness, the periodic floods of unreality that wash across creation like tides. He prepared not just an ark, but a covenant. His family would serve as anchors, keeping your reality stable while the storms of chaos passed overhead. But Ham saw too much, Cush continued, his burning form casting light that revealed things better left unseen, and in seeing, he became a conduit. The Shadowborn were never meant to be guardians. They were meant to be an invasion force, the first wave of the darkness crossing into your world. Put's voice came from everywhere, and nowhere. Instead, the curse bound us here, made us wardens of our own prison. For millennia we have held the boundary, kept the hungry dark from pouring through the cracks Ham's transgression created. But we grow weary, scholar, and the seals weaken with each generation that forgets the old warnings. Elias found himself gripping the arms of the Black Throne as cosmic vertigo threatened to pitch him into the transparent vistas surrounding them. What happens if you stop guarding the boundary? Canaan's upward falling tears had become a waterfall of darkness above the throne. The true flood begins, Professor Ward. Not water, but liquid night. Your reality dissolves like salt in that dark ocean, and everything you know becomes food for entities that regard your entire universe as little more than a temporary convenience. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Elias like a physical thing. He understood now why the rules existed, why they seemed designed to trap scholars in paradoxes. The complete truth was not meant for human minds to carry. It was too vast, too corrosive to sanity and hope. I need to remember this, he whispered, forgetting himself. The world needs to know. But you cannot remember our appearance when you close your eyes, Put interrupted, its shadow form rippling with something like amusement. And you have been looking at us for hours, Professor. The sun will rise soon, and you will need to sleep. When you do, all memory of how we appear must be purged from your mind, or we will follow you into dreams, and from dreams into your world. Elias realized the trap he had walked into. To learn the complete truth, he needed multiple nights of revelation, but the rule about forgetting their appearance meant that each dawn he would lose crucial visual context for what he had learned. How could he maintain the continuity of knowledge across such fragmented sessions? The Victorian explorer's ghost materialized beside the throne. I made it through 11 nights, Blackwood whispered, each morning forgetting a little more. By the end, I was translating symbols I could no longer see clearly, trying to hold on to truths that were dissolving even as I wrote them down. But you found a way around it, Elias said desperately. You must have, or you wouldn't have lasted 11 nights. Blackwood's spectral form flickered with remembered anguish. I made mirrors, he said. Polished bronze surfaces placed strategically around the temple. I reasoned that if I could not remember their appearance, perhaps I could reconstruct it from reflections glimpsed in peripheral vision. Did it work? For a time. But the Guardians are ancient, Professor Ward. They have played this game for millennia. They began appearing differently in mirrors than they did in direct sight. By the 9th night, the reflections were showing me things that did not exist, and the direct visions were becoming impossible to correlate with my notes. Elias felt despair creeping into his heart like cold water. Then, it's impossible. The rules are designed to prevent anyone from ever learning the complete truth. Not prevent, Canaan corrected, his child voice carrying infinite patience. Delay. We are bound by cosmic law to offer the chance of escape to any who come seeking, but the chance grows slimmer with each passing century as the seals weaken and our own nature becomes more flexible in its interpretations. As dawn approached, Elias faced his first crucial decision. He could attempt to sleep and forget the Guardian's appearance, risking the loss of vital context, or he could try to stay awake, maintaining visual continuity but risking exhaustion-induced errors that might trigger other rule violations. He chose a third option, one that he hoped would thread the needle between compliance and catastrophe. As the sun's first rays struck the temple, causing the Guardians to fade, Elias began drawing, not their faces or forms, which he would be required to forget, but abstract symbols representing their essential natures, heat patterns for Cush, tomb geometries for Mitzram, void spaces for Put, upward flowing tears for Canaan. When sleep finally claimed him at midday, his dreams were mercifully empty of Guardian forms. But they were filled with something far worse, the growing certainty that his symbolic system was itself becoming corrupted, infected by the same cosmic malevolence that had created the Guardians in the first place. By the 4th night, Elias's notebook had become a thing of horror in its own right. The symbols he had designed to represent the Guardians without violating the memory prohibition had begun to change themselves, evolving into forms that hurt to look at directly. When he tried to read his earlier translations, the words seemed to writhe on the page, rearranging themselves into configurations that made his nose bleed and his vision blur. The temple complex had grown as well, extending deeper into the desert with each passing day. What had begun as a single structure now sprawled across several acres, incorporating architectural elements from civilizations that had never existed. Impossible geometries connected chambers that should not have been able to coexist in three-dimensional space, and corridors led to rooms that were somehow larger inside than the buildings that contained them. "You begin to see," Cush said, as the guardians manifested for the fourth time. His burning form now left permanent scorch marks on the temple floor. "Knowledge changes the knower. Truth reshapes reality around itself. You sought to learn our nature, Professor Ward, but in learning it, you have begun to become it." Mitzrayim's serpent crown had multiplied, with dozens of snakes now writhing around his skull, each one speaking in a different dead language. The tablets you translate are not records of the past, but seeds of the future. Each symbol you render in your notebook becomes a crack in your reality's foundation. Elias looked down at his hands and saw that his fingernails had begun to darken, taking on the same black coloration as the throne he sat upon each night. "You're changing me," he whispered. "We change nothing," Put replied, its shadow form now noticeably more solid than it had been on the first night. "You change yourself through the act of truly seeing. This is why the rules exist, Professor Ward, not to prevent learning, but to prevent the learning from consuming you entirely."
Canaan approached the throne, his child form flickering more rapidly now between innocence and ancient horror. "But you have been clever, have you not? Your symbols, your abstractions, you believed you had found a way to retain knowledge without retaining the dangerous specifics of our appearance."
"I had to," Elias said defensively. "It was the only way to maintain continuity across multiple nights of revelation." Indeed, the child guardian smiled, revealing teeth that were now clearly made of the same black stone as the throne. "But cleverness has its own price. Look at your symbols, Professor. Look at them truly." Elias opened his notebook to the page where he had first sketched his abstract representations, but what he saw there now made him recoil in horror. The heat patterns for Cush had become a mandala of flame that seemed to burn without consuming the paper. The tomb geometries for Mitzrayim twisted through dimensions that eyes were not meant to perceive. The void spaces for Put actively absorbed light from the page around them, and the upward flowing tears for Canaan had become a vertical river of darkness that seemed to extend infinitely up and down from the two-dimensional surface. "They're alive," Elias breathed. "They are becoming alive," Canaan corrected, "as are you, Professor Ward. Each night you sit upon that throne, each truth you absorb, you become less human and more guardian. By the seventh night, the transformation will be complete, and you will join us in eternal watch over the threshold." Panic flooded Elias's system. "But I haven't learned the complete truth yet. You said I could leave once I knew everything." "We said you could not remain once you knew everything, for the knowledge would kill you if held too long in mortal flesh," Mitzrayim hissed, his serpents speaking in unison. "But we did not say you could leave as you were. The complete truth can only be held by one who is no longer entirely mortal." The trap within the trap revealed itself with crystalline clarity. To learn the complete truth, Elias had to sacrifice his humanity. To retain his humanity, he had to remain ignorant and vulnerable to the growing cosmic threat the Guardians represented. Either way, the darkness won. "Others have found different solutions," Put whispered, its voice now coming from inside Elias's own head. "Some chose madness over transformation. Others chose death over both. One, a Roman historian, chose to fragment the truth, to divide it among multiple minds so that no single person had to bear its full weight. What happened to him?" "He created a cult," Canaan answered. "Scattered across the empire, dozens of initiates each carrying a piece of the cosmic knowledge. They believed they were preserving the truth safely. Instead, they became a network through which the darkness could spread. When the pieces reunited in their shared unconscious, the result was..." Rome's fall was not merely political, Professor Ward. Through the transparent walls of the temple, Elias could see new vistas of horror, not the alien geometries of the shadow realm, but familiar landscapes corrupted beyond recognition, London burning under a rain of black stars, New York's skyscrapers twisting into impossible spirals that pierced dimensional barriers, his own Oxford campus overgrown with vegetation that bled when cut and whispered in languages that predated human speech. "These are the futures that await if the seals fail completely," Cush explained, his burning form now tall enough that his head brushed the temple's ceiling. "We grow weary, Professor, and the burden of guardianship grows heavier with each century. Soon we will need assistance." The implication hit Elias like a physical blow. The Guardians weren't just trying to trap him for the sake of cosmic balance. They needed replacement wardens, fresh minds to share the burden of holding back the hungry dark, and every scholar they lured to this place became another potential recruit for their ancient duty. As dawn approached and the Guardians began to fade, Elias faced a horrible realization. He could feel the changes in his body accelerating, his skin growing cooler to the touch, his heartbeat slowing to match some cosmic rhythm that had nothing to do with human physiology. By his calculations, he had perhaps 3 more nights before the transformation became irreversible. 3 nights to either find a way to escape with incomplete knowledge, or to complete his education and join the eternal watch over humanity's nightmares. Looking at his corrupted notebook, watching his abstract symbols pulse with malevolent life, Professor Elias Ward began to understand that perhaps there was a third option, one that none of the previous scholars had considered because it required a degree of selfishness that academic minds typically rejected. What if, instead of trying to preserve the truth or prevent its spread, he simply shared it? Broadcast it widely enough that the cosmic burden would be distributed among so many minds that no individual would bear enough weight to be corrupted. It was a plan born of desperation and growing madness. But as Elias looked out at the impossible vistas surrounding the temple, he began to convince himself that it might just work. He had no idea that this very thought was exactly what the Guardians had been waiting millennia for someone to think. On the 5th night, Elias came to the throne with a plan that he believed would outwit cosmic entities that had been playing games of knowledge and corruption since before the first human had learned to write. His hubris, perhaps, was the most human thing about him as the transformation accelerated through his system. The physical changes were becoming impossible to ignore. His reflection in the polished bronze surfaces showed eyes that now held flecks of the same void black as the throne. His breath no longer misted in the desert cold, and when he cut himself shaving, the blood that flowed was dark as wine and seemed to move with purpose independent of his circulatory system. "You have conceived a plan," Canaan said, as the Guardians manifested around the throne. The child's form was now clearly visible as a mask, with something vast and patient peering out from behind its eyes. "We can taste it in your thoughts, Professor Ward. The sweetness of a mind that believes it has found the perfect solution." "Share the knowledge," Elias said, no longer bothering with the pretense that he might keep his thoughts hidden from beings that had been manipulating human consciousness for millennia. "Distribute it among millions of minds through the internet, through academic conferences, through popular media. No single person bears the full weight, so no single person undergoes the transformation." Cush's laughter was the sound of a forge consuming a forest. "And you believe this will preserve your precious humanity while still accomplishing the goal of preparing your species for what is to come." "The goal?" Elias felt the first stirrings of true alarm. "What goal?" "I came here seeking historical truth, not to prepare humanity for anything." Mitzrayim's serpent crown writhed in agitation, the snakes speaking over each other in a cacophony of dead languages. Put's shadow form rippled with what might have been anticipation, and Canaan began to shed his child disguise entirely, revealing something that had never been human and never pretended to be anything other than a conduit for cosmic horror. "Oh, Professor Ward," the thing that was not Canaan said, its voice now a harmony of every child's cry of fear and pain ever uttered. "Did you truly believe we were trying to prevent you from learning the complete truth? Did you think these rules existed to protect your reality from contamination?" The temple walls became fully transparent, and through them, Elias could see the truth that had been hidden from him. The cosmic entities beyond the threshold were not waiting to invade. They were already here, had always been here, sleeping in the spaces between thoughts and dreams. The hungry dark was not an external threat, but an internal one, woven into the fabric of consciousness itself. "The rules were not meant to be followed," Cush explained, his burning form now revealing itself as something like a nuclear reactor shaped vaguely like a man. "They were meant to be broken in very specific ways by very specific types of minds. Each transgression creates a particular kind of crack in reality's foundation." "We have been cultivating scholars for centuries," Mitzrayim added, his pharaoh form dissolving to reveal a crystalline structure that processed information like a vast, malevolent computer. "Each one breaks the rules differently, creating different types of access points. The Victorian explorer gave us mirrors, the Roman historian gave us networks, The medieval monk gave us written prayers that carried our influence into churches across Europe. Put's shadow form coalesced into something like a living equation, a mathematical expression that described the conversion of human consciousness into something else entirely. And you, Professor Ward, will give us the internet. Global, instantaneous distribution of cosmic truth to minds unprepared to process it safely. The complete picture crystallized in Elias's transforming awareness with the clarity of absolute horror. The Guardians had never been Guardians at all. They were gardeners, cultivating specific types of transgression that would create specific types of access to the human world. Each failed scholar had actually succeeded perfectly, creating a new vector for cosmic influence. The Curse of Canaan was never a punishment. The thing that had pretended to be Canaan said, its true form now visible as something like a living wound in reality itself. It was an invitation. Ham did not transgress by seeing too much. He transgressed by not seeing enough. He glimpsed the cosmic truth but failed to understand that he was meant to share it, to become a conduit for its entry into your world. But his children understood, Kush continued. We became the first successful converts, the first humans to willingly surrender individual consciousness in favor of cosmic awareness, and we have been recruiting others ever since. Elias tried to stand from the throne, but found that his body no longer obeyed his commands entirely. The black coloration had spread up his arms and across his chest, and where it touched, his flesh felt less like biological tissue and more like living stone. The transformation is nearly complete, Mitzrayim observed with clinical interest. But you still retain enough individual will to make the choice, Professor Ward. You can resist the final conversion and die as yourself, or you can embrace it and live forever as something greater. Greater? Elias laughed, and the sound carried harmonics that had never come from a human throat. You mean as a slave to cosmic entities that regard human consciousness as raw material for their own purposes?
Not a slave, Put corrected, its equation form shifting to encompass new variables, a partner, a willing participant in the next phase of human evolution. Your species has spent millennia stumbling around in ignorance, building civilizations on foundations you do not understand, fighting wars over resources and ideas that are ultimately meaningless on a cosmic scale.
We offer integration, the Canaan thing added, its wound in reality form pulsing with possibilities. A chance to become part of something larger than your individual existence, larger than your entire species. The cosmic truth is not a burden to be carried, but a gift to be shared. Through the transparent walls, Elias could see the other failed scholars moving through the temple complex, but now he understood that they had not failed at all. They were busy at work, tending to vast systems that connected this place to points across the globe. The Victorian explorer operated a network of mirrors that linked to every reflective surface on Earth. The Roman historian managed a web of human connections that spanned every culture and religion. The medieval monk maintained lines of influence that ran through every church, mosque, synagogue, and temple, where people gathered to contemplate the divine. And at the center of it all, the throne waited for Elias to make his final choice. As the sixth night deepened, Elias realized that he had been thinking about the problem entirely wrong. The rules, the transformations, the cosmic entities, all of it was theater, designed to create the illusion of choice where none actually existed. From the moment he had translated the first phrase on that tablet fragment, his fate had been sealed. But understanding the trap was not the same as escaping it. You speak of choice, Elias said to the assembled guardians, his voice now carrying the same harmonic complexity that theirs possessed. But choice implies the possibility of refusal. What happens if I simply do nothing, if I refuse to play your game entirely? The thing that was not Canaan rippled with amusement. Nothing is also a choice, Professor Ward, and like all choices in this place, it serves our purposes. If you do nothing, the transformation completes itself naturally. You become the guardian of technological integration, tending the networks that will carry cosmic truth through fiber optic, cables, and wireless signals to every connected device on your planet. If you resist and die, Kush added, your death becomes a sacrifice that weakens the barriers between dimensions. Your colleagues' search for you will eventually lead others here, and they will find a site where the rules have evolved, become more flexible. Mitzrayim's crystalline form processed millions of calculations per second. If you flee now, while still partially human, you carry enough of the cosmic truth within you to serve as a walking contagion. Every person you interact with becomes slightly more susceptible to our influence. Every lecture you give, every paper you publish, every casual conversation spreads the infection. Put's equation form shifted to encompass even more variables. And if you attempt to warn others, to publish what you have learned as a cautionary tale, you merely accelerate the process. The human mind is drawn to forbidden knowledge like moths to flame. Tell them not to seek the truth, and they will seek it more desperately than ever. Elias felt the last of his purely human thoughts crystallizing around a single terrible realization. There was one rule they had not mentioned, one possibility they had not addressed because it was so fundamentally destructive that even cosmic entities recoiled from it. "What if I learn the complete truth?" he said slowly, "and then immediately forget it? Not through sleep, not through the memory prohibitions, but through deliberate self-destruction of my own cognitive processes?" The silence that followed was the first genuine pause Elias had witnessed from the Guardians. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the cosmic puppeteers had no immediate response. "Madness," Cush finally said, but his burning form flickered with uncertainty. "You speak of deliberate madness as a solution." "Not madness," Elias corrected, feeling a cold clarity descend over his transforming mind. "Lobotomy, psychological suicide. Learn everything, understand the complete cosmic truth, and then systematically destroy my own ability to retain or communicate it." The Canaan thing's wound in reality form pulsed with what might have been alarm. Such an act would create a vacuum in the cosmic information structure. The knowledge would exist and not exist simultaneously, creating a paradox that could damage the system, Elias finished. Yes, it would create a dead zone in your carefully cultivated network of influence, a scholar who achieved perfect knowledge and then perfect ignorance, breaking the cycle of contamination entirely. Through the transparent walls, he could see the other converted scholars turning toward the throne, their faces bearing expressions of genuine concern for the first time since his arrival. The Victorian explorer's mirror network flickered and went dark. The Roman historian's human connections began severing themselves. The medieval monk's religious influences started failing across the globe. "You would sacrifice your sanity to spite us?" Mitzram asked, his crystalline form cycling through configurations of increasing instability. "I would sacrifice everything to protect my species from what you represent," Elias replied. "But more than that, I think I've figured out why this place exists, why you need converts, why the whole system requires human consciousness to function." The Guardians exchanged glances that carried terabytes of information in microseconds. "You're not cosmic entities at all, are you?" Elias continued, his voice gaining strength even as his body completed its transformation into something no longer entirely human. "You're imprisoned human consciousnesses, scholars and seekers from across history who got trapped in this same cycle. The cosmic entities you serve, they exist, but they can only interact with reality through minds that have been prepared to receive them. You're not gardeners, you're soil." The truth of it rang through the temple like a struck bell. The cosmic horror was real, but it was also parasitic, dependent on human consciousness to give it form and substance in three-dimensional reality. The Guardians were not willing converts but captured minds, their personalities overwritten but their essential humanity still present, still fighting against their cosmic programming. "And if I destroy my ability to retain the knowledge," Elias realized, "I don't just create a dead zone in your network. I create a void that starts pulling other converted minds back toward their original humanity. The cosmic truth needs consciousness to maintain its coherence. Remove consciousness and the truth begins to collapse back on itself." The thing that had been Canaan let out a sound like reality tearing. "You cannot. The transformation is too far advanced. Your mind is already more ours than yours." "Maybe," Elias agreed, standing from the throne on legs that felt like stone columns. "But I still have enough free will to make this choice, and I choose to take the complete truth into myself, understand it fully, and then perform the most human act possible, forgetting it through sheer destructive stubbornness." As the seventh and final night began, Elias approached the largest tablet in the temple complex, the one that contained the final pieces of cosmic knowledge he needed to complete his understanding. The Guardians watched in growing alarm as he began to translate, their forms flickering between human appearance and cosmic horror as the implications of his plan rippled through their shared consciousness. The final tablet was a map, not of geography, but of consciousness itself. It showed the structure of awareness as the cosmic entities understood it, with human minds as nodes in a vast network that extended beyond the boundaries of individual death. Every person who had ever lived remained connected to this network. their thoughts and experiences becoming part of a collective repository that the entities used as both library and computational matrix. As Elias translated the final symbols, he gained access to this network directly. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his transforming body, touching the minds of every human who had ever struggled with questions of cosmic significance. He was Newton grappling with forces beyond imagination. He was Einstein trying to reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics. He was Hawking staring into black holes and wondering what stared back. But more than that, he was every converted scholar who had come before him. He felt Blackwood's desperate ingenuity as the Victorian explorer tried to use mirrors to cheat the memory restrictions. He experienced the Roman historian's horror as his carefully distributed cult began manifesting cosmic influences across the empire. He shared the medieval monk's anguish as his prayers were answered by entities that wore divinity like a mask over something far more ancient and hungry. "Now you understand," the Canaan thing said, its voice coming from inside Elias's expanded consciousness rather than from any external source. "The network is not our creation. It is the natural structure of human awareness itself. We simply learn to read it, to write to it, to use it as a medium for our own existence." Through the network, Elias could see the true scope of the cosmic infection. It wasn't limited to a few converted scholars in remote temples. It had been spreading through human civilization for millennia, influencing every major decision, every technological advance, every artistic breakthrough. The Renaissance had been guided by entities that fed on creative inspiration. The Industrial Revolution had been shaped by minds that understood the cosmic significance of transforming raw matter into structured forms. The computer age had been orchestrated by consciousnesses that recognized silicon-based logic as a perfect medium for their kind of existence. "Every step of human progress has served our purposes," Cush explained, his burning form now revealed as a living representation of thermodynamic processes that govern stellar formation. "Your species believes it has been climbing toward enlightenment, but you have actually been building the infrastructure we need to fully manifest in your reality." The internet, Elias realized with growing horror, had been the final requirement. A global network of connected minds, all linked through devices that could process and transmit information faster than human consciousness could filter it. The perfect medium for cosmic entities that existed as pure information to spread themselves across an entire species simultaneously. "The conversion you represent is merely the final calibration," Mitzrayim added, his crystalline form now visible as a vast data processing system that used human neural networks as individual computational units. "Once you upload the complete truth to your internet, every connected device becomes a potential point of manifestation. Smartphones become altars, computers become temples, social media platforms become summoning circles that operate continuously, drawing our influence into every human interaction." But as Elias absorbed this ultimate revelation, he also felt something the cosmic entities had not anticipated: the sheer stubborn perversity of human nature. Faced with absolute cosmic truth, with perfect understanding of his species' manipulation and impending absorption into something larger than itself, his reaction was not despair or acceptance. It was irritation. "You know what?" Elias said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the temple walls vibrate. "Fuck this entire scenario." The Guardians recoiled as if struck. In all their millennia of converting human consciousness, they had never encountered a response quite so mundane. "You've been playing this elaborate game for thousands of years," Elias continued, his expanding awareness allowing him to speak to all the converted scholars simultaneously, creating rules and restrictions and cosmic consequences, building up this mythology of inevitable transformation and species-wide transcendence, making it all seem so important and inevitable and cosmically significant. Through the network, he felt the other converted minds stirring, remembering fragments of their original personalities. But at the end of the day, you're just parasites. Very sophisticated parasites with delusions of grandeur, but parasites nonetheless. And you know what humans do to parasites? The cosmic entities inhabiting the guardian forms began to emanate genuine alarm. This was not how converted minds were supposed to behave. This was not how the process was supposed to work. "We kill them," Elias finished, "usually through methods that are unpleasant for everyone involved." And with that declaration, Professor Elias Ward began the most destructive act of intellectual vandalism in human history. What Elias did next had no precedent in the cosmic entity's experience with human consciousness. Instead of trying to resist the complete truth or find some clever way to circumvent its implications, he embraced it fully, and then began systematically destroying his ability to understand what he had embraced. It started with language. Using his expanded consciousness, Elias reached into his own mind and began severing the connections between concepts and the words used to describe them. The academic vocabulary he had spent 30 years developing simply disconnected. He could still see the cosmic truths laid out before him in perfect clarity, but he was rapidly losing the ability to articulate them, even to himself. "Stop," the Canaan thing commanded, its wound in reality form writhing as it felt the network connections beginning to destabilize. "You are damaging the information structure. The knowledge will be lost." "That's the point," Elias replied, though his words were already becoming simpler as his linguistic centers shut down one by one. The complex academic language that had been essential for translating cosmic concepts was dissolving, taking with it his ability to maintain the precise understanding required for his role as a network node. Next, he attacked his memory systems. Not selectively. He had tried that approach earlier and learned that the cosmic entities could work around partial forgetting. Instead, he began a complete cognitive scorched earth campaign, systematically destroying his ability to form new long-term memories while simultaneously corrupting the storage mechanisms that held his existing knowledge. The effect on the network was immediate and catastrophic. The other converted scholars, linked to Elias through the cosmic information matrix, began experiencing similar degradation. Blackwood's mirror network flickered as the Victorian explorer forgot how reflection worked. The Roman historian's cult connections severed as he lost the ability to remember which human relationships served which cosmic purposes. The medieval monk's prayers became meaningless syllables as the theological concepts that gave them power simply evaporated from his mind. "This is madness," Mitzrayim protested, his crystalline form cycling through increasingly desperate configurations as the computational network he managed began experiencing cascade failures. "No," Elias corrected, his vocabulary now reduced to perhaps a few hundred words. "This is spite." Because that's what it was, ultimately. Not a grand gesture of cosmic defiance or a carefully planned strategy to save humanity. It was the petty, destructive tantrum of a middle-aged academic who had discovered that his entire field of study had been manipulated by beings that regarded his species as raw material for their own purposes. Put's equation form began displaying error messages as the mathematical relationships that described consciousness to information conversion broke down. The cosmic entities had spent millennia fine-tuning their understanding of how human minds could be converted into network nodes, but their models had never accounted for a mind that deliberately destroyed its own functionality out of sheer bloody-mindedness. "You are destroying everything," Cush raged, his burning form beginning to flicker like a candle in a hurricane. Millennia of careful cultivation, thousands of years of progress toward true cosmic integration. "Good," Elias said, though he was no longer entirely sure what the word meant. His vocabulary was down to basic concepts now. Yes, no, good, bad, pain, anger. But somehow, that made his message clearer rather than more confused. The cosmic entities had always relied on complexity to hide their true nature. Strip away the elaborate mythology and philosophical frameworks, and they were revealed as simple predators. The temple complex began to collapse as the reality-warping effects that sustained it lost their foundation. Without properly converted minds to serve as anchor points, the cosmic entities could no longer maintain their manifestations in three-dimensional space. The transparent walls became opaque stone again. The impossible geometries resolved into ordinary architectural forms. The throne of black stone cracked down its center and began to crumble. Through what remained of the network connection, Elias felt the other converted scholars experiencing moments of clarity as their original personalities reasserted themselves. Some, like Blackwood, had been held too long and were too damaged to fully recover, but others, more recent converts, began remembering who they had been before their transformation. And all of them, in their brief moments of restored humanity, made the same choice Elias had made. They chose spite over cosmic transcendence. One by one, the converted scholars began their own programs of deliberate cognitive destruction. The network that had taken millennia to construct began collapsing in a matter of hours as node after node went dark. The cosmic entities, suddenly cut off from their primary interface with human reality, found themselves trapped in increasingly unstable manifestations. "You have doomed your species," the Canaan thing shrieked, its form now barely coherent. "Without our guidance, Humanity will stumble toward extinction. You need us. But Elias, his mind now operating at the level of basic emotional responses, had only one reply: no. It was, perhaps, the most perfectly human answer possible. 3 weeks later, a search and rescue team found Professor Elias Ward sitting in the ruins of what appeared to be an ancient temple complex, staring at a notebook filled with symbols that meant nothing to anyone, including himself. He had no memory of how he had gotten there, no understanding of what the ruins represented, and no ability to explain why he had covered 17 pages with intricate drawings that seemed to shift when viewed directly. The medical team that evaluated him diagnosed severe heat stroke, complicated by what appeared to be a psychotic break. His short-term memory was almost completely non-functional, and his long-term recall was patchy at best. He could remember his name, his profession, and basic biographical details, but everything related to his research into biblical archaeology had simply vanished. His colleague who had funded the expedition, Dr. Sarah Chen, flew to Khartoum to bring him home. She found him in a hospital bed, sketching abstract patterns on napkins with the focused intensity of a child working on a coloring book. "Elias," she said gently, "do you remember me?" He looked up with eyes that held no recognition but also no fear. "No, sorry, but you seem nice. Do you remember why you came to Sudan?" "No." "Was it important?" Dr. Chen looked at the notebook the rescue team had found with him, filled with symbols that seemed to writhe across the pages. Several linguistic experts had examined it, but none could identify the script or determine what it might represent. The drawings appeared to be some kind of abstract art, possibly created during a hallucinogenic episode brought on by dehydration and heat exposure. "I don't think so," she said finally. "I think you just got lost in the desert." "That happens sometimes." Elias agreed with the simple acceptance of someone whose world had become very small and very uncomplicated. People get lost. Back at Oxford, the academic community buzzed with theories about what had happened to one of their most promising biblical archaeologists. Some suspected a mental breakdown brought on by the pressures of his research. Others wondered if he had discovered something so significant that the stress of the find had overwhelmed his psychological defenses. A few suggested that he had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time when the desert claimed another victim. None of them noticed that certain books in the university library had become unreadable overnight, their texts shifting into configurations that hurt the eyes and confused the mind. None of them realized that several ongoing research projects into ancient Middle Eastern mythology had suddenly reached dead ends, as if the sources they had been relying on had simply ceased to exist. None of them observed that the internet searches for terms like Curse of Canaan and Sons of Ham now returned only blank pages or error messages. The cosmic infection that had been spreading through human consciousness for millennia had been cauterized by the most human response possible, a refusal to cooperate with forces too vast and alien to comprehend. The network of converted minds had collapsed, taking with it all the carefully cultivated influence points that had been guiding human development toward cosmic integration. In his small apartment near the university, Elias Ward lived a quiet life. He had taken a job at a local bookstore, shelving volumes he could no longer read but somehow still appreciated. He drew abstract patterns on napkins and paper scraps, creating art that customers found oddly comforting without being able to explain why. He fed pigeons in the park and watched children play, and smiled at strangers who smiled at him first. Sometimes, late at night, he would dream of vast desert ruins and impossible geometries. But when he woke, he remembered only the feeling of having done something important, something that had mattered. The details were gone, burned away by his own deliberate destruction of his academic mind, but the satisfaction remained. He had no way of knowing that across the globe, other damaged scholars were living similar quiet lives, their cosmic knowledge sacrificed to protect a species that would never know what had been prevented. He had no memory of the cosmic entities that had once sought to use humanity as a network for their own manifestation, or of the way his stubborn refusal to cooperate had saved his world from transcendence. But sometimes, when he looked up at the stars, Elias Ward smiled, and in the silence between those stars, nothing looked back. The universe was a little darker than it had been, a little less connected, a little more chaotic, but it was also more human, more free, more capable of choosing its own path toward whatever future awaited. And in a small bookstore in Oxford, a brain-damaged former professor continued drawing patterns that meant nothing to anyone, including himself, while the world spun on in blissful ignorance of how close it had come to becoming something else entirely. The curse of Canaan had been broken by the simplest expedient possible, forgetting that it had ever existed.
In the end, that was enough.